Your charity was merely a mask for theft.
Duke Julian said, loud enough for every patient in the ward to hear. My sister will repair what you have corrupted. Duchess Eleanor surrendered the brass hospital keys without lowering her eyes. She had sold her mother's pearls to buy the surgical instruments, spent winters treating miners without payment, and kept St. Anne's alive through 2 epidemics. Now forged invoices had persuaded her husband that she had stolen from the very people she served. Lady Augusta accepted the keys with a triumphant smile. At that moment, a child ran into the ward, shouting that a man had fallen from a royal carriage. Eleanor reached the courtyard first. The injured passenger wore a plain coat, but a chain around his neck bore the king's private seal. Sewn into his sleeve was a page torn from St. Anne's missing account book. Across the page, someone had written a list of payments to Augusta. Before Eleanor could read the final name, Julian tore the paper from her hand. His gaze moved over the figures. For one brief second, his expression changed. Eleanor saw recognition, or fear, before he folded the page and closed it inside his fist. Give that back, she said. This is evidence in an inquiry against you. My name is not beside those payments. But the page came from a ledger under your control. Until 3 weeks ago, when Augusta persuaded you to replace my steward, Julian's jaw tightened. He had made that decision despite Eleanor's warning that the new clerk, Mr. Vale, possessed no medical accounting experience. Augusta had called Eleanor territorial. Julian had accused his wife of resisting necessary oversight. Now Augusta stepped into the courtyard, her pale blue gown untouched by the mud around them. My brother is right. Eleanor must not be allowed to interfere with evidence. The wounded stranger groaned. Eleanor dropped beside him. His breathing was shallow, and blood darkened the left side of his coat. She pressed 2 fingers to his throat and found a rapid, weakening pulse. He has been shot beneath the ribs. We must take him inside. Augusta held up the keys. You no longer have authority here. Eleanor stared at her. If he remains in this courtyard, he will die. Then one of my physicians will treat him. Your physicians? Dr. Samuel Reed pushed through the gathering crowd, his sleeves rolled above his elbows. He had served beside Eleanor throughout the winter fever and had refused Augusta's offer of promotion that morning. Every surgeon in this hospital was appointed by the Duchess. Julian stepped between them. Dr. Reed, you will obey the new administration or leave. Samuel looked toward Eleanor. She gave the smallest shake of her head. A confrontation would waste time the injured man did not possess. Carry him to the eastern operating room, Eleanor ordered the porters. No one moved. The patients watched from the windows. Nurses stood frozen beneath the stone archway. Julian had stripped Eleanor of her position in a single public declaration, and now anyone who obeyed her risked dismissal. Then 12-year-old Thomas Bell, the child who had raised the alarm, gripped the stranger beneath one arm. I'll help her, Grace. His mother had died 2 years earlier, but Eleanor had saved his infant sister during the same terrible night. One by one, 2 miners rose from a bench and joined him. Samuel took the stranger's shoulders. The hospital porter seized his legs. Julian's face hardened as they carried the man past him. Eleanor followed them into the operating room. Boil water. Bring clean linen, forceps, and my black case. Your case has been removed, Nurse Clara whispered. Lady Augusta ordered everything from your office placed in the cellar. Then retrieve it. Clara ran. Eleanor cut through the messenger's coat and examined the wound. The bullet had entered below the final rib, but the bleeding pattern suggested it had not pierced the liver. That gave him a chance, if she could remove the lead before internal bleeding or infection killed him. As Samuel prepared the instruments, Eleanor searched the man's clothing for identification. She found no wallet, no official papers, and no weapon. Someone had stripped him of everything except the royal seal, perhaps because it had been concealed beneath his shirt. Or because they wanted the seal found. The thought stopped her. Samuel, look at his boots. They were expensive riding boots, but the soles were nearly clean. A man thrown from a carriage on the rain-soaked northern road should have been covered in mud. His coat was dirty. His boots were not. He was placed in that carriage after he was wounded, Eleanor murmured. The stranger's eyelids fluttered. His hand shot upward and closed around her wrist with startling strength. Ledger, he rasped. I found the page. Not accounts. His grip weakened. What ledger? Eleanor leaned closer. What were you bringing to St. Anne's? His lips moved, but no sound emerged. Then his body convulsed. Samuel caught his shoulders. Eleanor smelled something bitter on the man's breath. Almonds beneath blood and brandy. He has been poisoned. The door opened behind them. Augusta entered with Julian and 2 parish constables. In her hand was a small brown bottle bearing the label of St. Anne's Dispensary. This was found in Eleanor's medical bag, Augusta announced. Cyanide. Julian looked from the bottle to the dying royal messenger and then to his wife. Eleanor understood the trap before he spoke. The forged accounts had not been meant merely to take away her hospital. Someone had needed her disgraced, her medicines planted, and a servant of the king delivered into her hands at precisely the right moment. Julian turned to the constables. Arrest the Duchess for attempting to murder the king's messenger. The constables moved toward Eleanor, but she did not rise from beside the operating table. If you arrest me now, he will be dead before you reach the magistrate's office. Julian's eyes remained fixed upon the brown bottle in Augusta's hand. Dr. Reed can treat him. Samuel examined the messenger's dilated pupils and rapidly weakening pulse. I can remove the bullet, Your Grace. I cannot identify the poison quickly enough to save him. I already have, Eleanor said. The smell suggests cyanide, but his convulsions are too delayed. Someone mixed it with laudanum to conceal the first symptoms. Augusta's confident expression faltered. Eleanor noticed. Where did you find that bottle? In your medical bag. My bag was locked inside the cellar before this man arrived. Augusta glanced toward Julian. She is attempting to confuse the matter. No, I am establishing time. Eleanor turned to Clara. When did you retrieve my case? Only minutes ago, Your Grace. The lock had already been broken. Who had access to the cellar? Clara hesitated. Her gaze traveled from Augusta to the 2 constables. Answer her, Samuel said. Mr. Vale took the cellar keys this morning. The new clerk. Augusta's choice. Julian's face hardened, but not against his sister. This proves nothing. Vale may have entered on hospital business. Then question him, Eleanor replied. He has gone to London, Augusta said quickly. I sent him to deliver the financial records to our solicitor. Eleanor held her gaze. How convenient. The messenger convulsed again. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. There was no time to force Julian to confront what he refused to see. Eleanor opened the man's shirt and pressed along his abdomen. The bullet had lodged shallowly, but the poison was killing him faster than the wound. Clara, charcoal powder. Samuel, prepare the stomach tube. Julian stepped closer. You are still under arrest. Then arrest me after I save the crown's servant. For an instant, neither moved. Eleanor remembered another Julian, the young marquess who had once held a lantern while she treated a groom crushed beneath a carriage. He had admired her steadiness then. He had called her courage the finest thing in Ashbourne. That man had disappeared gradually, first beneath debts inherited from his father, then beneath Parliament's contempt for a duke whose wife worked among common patients, and finally, beneath Augusta's constant warnings that Eleanor's independence made him appear weak. His next words proved how far he had chosen to fall. "If he dies beneath your hands, I will testify against you myself." Eleanor turned back to the patient. "Then watch carefully." She forced charcoal through the tube while Samuel controlled the man's breathing. Clara cut away the remaining fabric around the wound. Eleanor inserted the forceps, following the bullet's path by touch. The metal resisted. "His pulse is fading," Samuel warned. Eleanor adjusted the angle and drew the bullet free. It struck the silver tray with a sharp ringing sound. A second object followed it. Not bone, not cloth. A tiny cylinder of rolled copper fell from the wound. Everyone stared. "The bullet drove it inside him," Samuel said. Eleanor lifted the cylinder with forceps. One end bore a miniature crown. The messenger had not merely carried a secret document. Someone had hidden it inside his body before shooting him, trusting that only a skilled surgeon would discover it. His eyes opened. "Whitehall," he whispered. "Sir Matthew, betrayed." His breath stopped. Eleanor pressed her fingers to his throat. "Nothing." She began compressions. Samuel worked beside her, but after several desperate minutes, he placed one blood-stained hand over hers. "He is gone." Silence filled the operating room. Augusta recovered first. "A royal messenger has died while Duchess Eleanor operated upon him. The constables have witnessed everything." "He was poisoned before reaching St. Anne's," Samuel said. "So Eleanor claims." Eleanor looked at the copper cylinder. Whatever lay inside might prove why the messenger had come, or it might complete the trap intended for her. Julian extended his hand. "Give it to me." "No, I am a peer of the realm, and I am the physician who recovered it. You are an accused thief standing beside a dead royal servant." Eleanor closed her fingers around the cylinder. "All the more reason not to surrender the only evidence to a man who has already hidden one page from the constables." The senior constable looked at Julian. "What page, Your Grace?" Augusta's face drained of color. Julian slowly removed the folded ledger sheet from his coat. "It was found upon the dead man." The constable opened it, his brow furrowed as he read the payments made to Augusta. At the bottom, where the final name should have appeared, the paper had been torn away. "This page is meaningless without the remainder of the ledger," Julian said. "Then we must find it," Eleanor replied. Augusta moved toward the wash basin, pretending to steady herself. Eleanor saw her hand slip beneath the folds of her skirt. A faint crackle came from the fireplace. "Clara!" Eleanor shouted. The nurse rushed forward and seized Augusta's wrist. A torn scrap of paper fluttered from her hand and landed inches from the flames. Samuel retrieved it. The fragment fitted the bottom of the ledger page perfectly. Beside the final payment was not Mr. Vale's name, nor Augusta's. It read, "By authorization of His Grace, Julian Ashbourne." The constable looked up at the Duke. "Your Grace, I believe you must now accompany your wife to the magistrate." Julian did not resist the constable, but fury sharpened every movement as they left the operating room. "This is absurd," he said. "A duke cannot be detained on the strength of a torn account page." "A duchess was about to be arrested on the strength of a bottle," Eleanor replied. His eyes met hers. Shame flickered there, quickly buried beneath pride. The magistrate, Mr. Harcourt, arrived before they could leave St. Anne's. He ordered the operating room sealed and moved everyone into the hospital's board chamber. The dead messenger remained under Samuel's supervision, while the ledger page, the poison bottle, and the copper cylinder were placed upon a long oak table. Augusta sat beside Julian as though she were the injured party. Eleanor remained opposite them, her blood-stained sleeves drawing uneasy glances from the constables. Mr. Harcourt examined the authorization line. "Is this your signature, Your Grace?" Julian looked at it for a long moment. Yes. Augusta gripped his arm. Julian, you signed dozens of documents for the hospital. You could not have known what this payment represented. Eleanor watched her husband's face. Augusta had answered too quickly. What did you believe you were authorizing? Eleanor asked. A restructuring fund, Julian said. Augusta told me St. Anne's was nearing insolvency. And you did not ask me? You refused every attempt at oversight. I refused to dismiss trained nurses and replace them with your sister's friends. You made every disagreement sound like an attack upon your patients, because your decisions harmed them. Mr. Harcourt raised a hand. Enough. What sum did you authorize? £20,000. Even Eleanor had not expected the amount. St. Anne's could operate for several years on half of it. Where did the money come from? She asked. Julian's silence answered before he did. From your dowry trust. The room seemed to contract around her. Her marriage settlement protected that money for Eleanor's personal use and the hospital's maintenance. Julian could not legally touch it without her consent, unless he had submitted proof that she was mentally or financially incapable. You declared me incompetent, she said. I signed a temporary petition. On whose evidence? Mine, Augusta answered. I documented Eleanor's erratic spending and her dangerous obsession with medical work. Eleanor looked at Julian. You allowed your sister to testify against your wife, transferred my money, and never once asked me to explain? I believed I was protecting the hospital. No, you believed whatever allowed you to control it. The accusation landed harder than anger. Julian looked away. Mr. Harcourt unfolded another sheet found among Augusta's appointment documents. The transferred funds were paid to the Albion Medical Supply Company. I have never heard of it, Eleanor said. I have, Samuel said from the doorway. Everyone turned. He had removed his blood-stained apron, but his face remained grim. Albion supplied the new fever tonic Lady Augusta introduced last month. I objected because the bottles carried no manufacturer's address. Augusta rose. You are a disgruntled employee defending the woman who appointed you. I am a physician defending patients. 3 developed seizures after receiving that tonic. Eleanor's thoughts moved rapidly. She had noticed the seizures, but blamed an unusually severe fever. Augusta had insisted the medicine was recommended by a London specialist. What happened to the bottles? Eleanor asked. Mr. Vale removed them yesterday, the same day the messenger had been attacked. Mr. Harcourt pointed toward the copper cylinder. Open it. Eleanor examined the miniature crown stamped into its end. The cylinder possessed no visible hinge, only 3 narrow rotating bands engraved with letters. A cipher lock, she said. Julian leaned closer despite himself. Can you solve it? The messenger said Whitehall and named Sir Matthew. Sir Matthew Wren? Julian asked. The king's private physician. Eleanor rotated the first band to W, then the others to R and E. Nothing happened. Perhaps the code is not a name, Samuel suggested. She studied the messenger's royal seal. Around its edge ran the Latin words used on private crown correspondence. 3 letters appeared more deeply engraved than the others. R-E-X. Eleanor aligned the bands. The cylinder opened with a soft click. Inside was a tightly rolled strip of silk covered in tiny handwriting. Mr. Harcourt spread it beneath the lamp. The document listed shipments from Albion Medical Supply Company to 6 charitable hospitals. Beside each shipment appeared the same notation. Fever tonic, 24 bottles. 3 hospitals had already reported unexplained deaths. At the bottom was a message signed by Sir Matthew Wren. The substance is not medicine. It is a diluted compound designed to create recurring illness without immediate suspicion. Someone within Whitehall is purchasing silence and testing the dosage upon charity patients. St. Anne's Holds the original transaction ledger. Trust only Duchess Eleanor Ashbourne. No one spoke. Eleanor read the final sentence twice. The messenger had come to her because the royal physician believed she alone could find the missing ledger. Augusta laughed nervously. This silk could have been written by anyone. The cipher bears the king's private mark, Mr. Harcourt said. Forgery would be treason. A bell began ringing in the corridor. Clara burst into the chamber. Your Grace, patients in the West Ward are collapsing. Eleanor ran. 6 people lay convulsing between the beds. Mothers screamed while nurses tried to restrain their limbs. On the medicine trolley stood a tray of opened fever tonic, the bottles supplied by Albion. Who administered this? Eleanor demanded. A new nurse, Clara said. Lady Augusta hired her this morning. Find her. Eleanor knelt beside the youngest patient and smelled his breath. The same bitter trace lingered beneath the tonic. Samuel, charcoal for every conscious patient. Prepare stomach tubes for the others. Julian appeared behind her. What can I do? The question came too late to repair anything, but the patients did not have time for Eleanor's anger. Send riders to every hospital named on that silk. Tell them to destroy the tonic. Use your title for something useful. Julian left at once. For the next hour, Eleanor moved from bed to bed, forcing antidotes between clenched teeth and guiding nurses through violent seizures. 2 patients stopped breathing. She revived one. The other, a gray-haired seamstress named Mrs. Weller, died with Eleanor's hand around hers. When the ward finally quieted, Clara returned alone. The new nurse has vanished, but we found this beneath her mattress. She handed Eleanor a miniature portrait. It showed Augusta standing beside Mr. Vale, not as employer and clerk, but with his arm around her waist. Behind them was the sign of the Albion Medical Supply Company. On the reverse, someone had written, "When the final patient dies, Ashbourne will pay us twice." Eleanor turned toward the doorway. Augusta was gone. So was the copper cylinder containing the king's evidence. Eleanor sent constables to every exit, but Augusta had already escaped through the laundry passage. A stable boy reported seeing her leave in a closed carriage with a veiled woman, the new nurse who had poisoned the patients. Julian returned as the search began. The riders are on their way to the other hospitals, he said. What happened? Your sister stole the cylinder and fled. His face went still. Augusta would not. Eleanor held up the miniature portrait. Julian studied the image of Augusta in Mr. Vale's arms. When he turned it over and read the message, his fingers tightened around the frame. She told me Vale was married. Perhaps that was the only truthful thing she said. He looked toward Mrs. Weller's covered body. How many? 1 dead, 5 may survive. The words struck him visibly. Yet Eleanor felt no satisfaction. His pain could not return a dead woman to her family, and disbelief was not innocence. Where would Augusta go? Mr. Harcourt asked. Julian considered the question. Our father left her a hunting lodge near Blackmere. Then send men there, Eleanor said. She knows I would think of it, which makes it useful as a diversion. Eleanor studied the portrait again. The Albion sign behind Augusta and Vale contained a painted lion holding a chain. She had seen that emblem recently, not on medicine bottles, but stamped upon shipping crates in St. Anne's cellar. She took Clara and Samuel downstairs. Half the cellar shelves had been emptied. Broken locks hung from the cabinets, and the air smelled of damp straw and chemicals. Eleanor found scrape marks across the floor, leading toward a wall of coal bins. Move them. Behind the bins stood a narrow door Eleanor had never seen. Its lock was new, but Samuel broke it with an iron bar. The hidden chamber contained hundreds of Albion bottles, false hospital seals, and stacks of invoices bearing Eleanor's copied signature. 6 wooden crates were marked for Whitehall Palace. Julian entered behind them. Why would they send fever tonic to the palace? They would not label poison as poison, Eleanor said. She opened one crate. Beneath the bottles lay sealed packets of medicinal tea used by the royal household. Samuel examined them. These have been tampered with. The conspiracy was no longer limited to poor patients. The charity hospitals had been laboratories. Someone had tested how much poison could cause weakness, confusion, and recurring illness without immediate death. Eleanor looked at Julian. "When is the next royal shipment?" His face paled. "Tomorrow morning. Augusta asked me to recommend Albion as a supplier to the Lord Chamberlain." "And did you?" "Yes." Again, his authority had opened the door she had tried to keep closed. Mr. Harcourt ordered the crates seized. Eleanor searched the shelves until she found a correspondence box. Most letters had been burned, but one survived beneath the false invoices. It was addressed to Mr. Vale. The king must appear ill before the parliamentary vote. Once Ashbourne's wife is convicted, her hospital will bear the blame. The Duke's recommendation will protect our access to the palace. The signature had been cut away. Julian read it over Eleanor's shoulder. "What vote?" "Perhaps the reform of charitable trusts," Mr. Harcourt said. "The king is expected to support it next week. The proposed law would expose private companies profiting from hospitals. If the king became too ill to endorse it, Albion could continue stealing public funds." Eleanor searched the letter for anything that might identify the writer. The paper was ordinary, but a small gray powder clung to the fold. "Printing dust," she said. "This passed through a press." Samuel pointed to an indentation along the bottom. Another sheet was written on top of it. Eleanor placed the letter beneath a low lamp and rubbed charcoal lightly across its surface. Hidden words emerged. "Invitation. Founders' Banquet. Royal College of Physicians. Thursday at 8. "That is tonight," Clara said. Mr. Harcourt checked his watch. Less than 2 hours away. Julian reached for his coat. "I can enter the college. You cannot go alone," Eleanor said. "Your name authorized these shipments. Whoever planned this may intend to use you again, or silence you." He met her gaze. "Then come with me. You publicly dismissed me as a thief this morning. The college will not admit me." Julian's shame deepened. "I will correct that, not privately." An hour later, the Royal College's banquet hall fell silent as Duke Julian entered with Eleanor on his arm. Physicians, ministers, and noble patrons turned toward the woman whose alleged crimes were already being whispered across London. At the center of the room stood Sir Matthew Wren, alive. Eleanor stopped. The dying messenger had named Sir Matthew as the betrayed man, or the betrayer, yet the royal physician showed no surprise at seeing the copper cylinder missing from her possession. Instead, he raised his glass and announced, "Gentlemen, the Duchess of Ashbourne has brought poisoned medicine into this building." Doors slammed shut around them. From the gallery above, Augusta smiled down at her brother. Then the first minister collapsed. Eleanor reached the fallen minister before anyone else. Lord Pembroke's face had turned gray, and his pulse fluttered beneath her fingers. A broken champagne glass lay beside his hand. The other guests backed away, as if his illness itself were contagious. "Do not touch the drinks," Eleanor ordered. "Close the serving doors." Sir Matthew descended from the dais. "You have no authority here." "I have more authority than a man watching his patient die." She smelled the minister's breath. No trace of almonds. His pupils were constricted, and a thin line of blood ran from one nostril. "Samuel, bring my case. Clara, find mustard, warm water, and charcoal," Augusta called from the gallery. She carries the same poison that killed the royal messenger." Fear swept through the hall. 2 college guards seized Eleanor's arms. Julian stepped between them and his wife. "Release her." "Your Grace," Sir Matthew said, "the Duchess has been accused of murder, and I was accused beside her." Julian faced the physicians and ministers watching him. "The documents used against my wife bear my signature because I authorized the transfer of her money without consulting her. I also recommended Albion's medicines to the palace. If Eleanor is guilty for standing near poisoned patients, then I am guilty for opening every door to those who poisoned them." Eleanor looked at him. It was the first honest thing he had said publicly that day. It did not undo his betrayal, but it cost him something: his reputation, his political influence, perhaps his liberty. The guards released her. Eleanor forced charcoal into Lord Pembroke's stomach, while Samuel supported his breathing. The minister convulsed once, then coughed violently. His pulse strengthened. "He will live," Eleanor said. Relief moved through the hall, but Sir Matthew's expression showed none. Eleanor picked up the stem of Pembroke's glass with a napkin. A faint, oily substance coated the rim. When she held it toward the candlelight, it shimmered blue. The poison was painted onto this glass before the champagne was poured. Lord Pembroke was targeted. "Convenient speculation," Sir Matthew said. "It is testable. Bring silver nitrate." A college physician obeyed. When Eleanor mixed a scraping from the rim with the solution, a dark precipitate formed. Samuel examined it. A heavy metal compound. "The same family of poison used in Albion's tonic," Eleanor said, "but concentrated." The banquet guests began inspecting their glasses. Only Lord Pembroke's bore the blue film. Augusta moved toward a side door on the gallery. Julian saw her. "Stop, my sister." Constables climbed the stairs, but Sir Matthew blocked them. "No one leaves until the Duchess is searched." Eleanor studied him more carefully. Sir Matthew Wren had served the crown for 20 years. His portrait hung inside St. Anne's lecture room. The man before her possessed the same silver hair and narrow face. Yet something was wrong. The real Sir Matthew broke his left hand during the winter epidemic, she said. The hall quieted. The man smiled coldly. "Many physicians have broken bones. His 4th finger healed crooked. Yours is straight." He immediately closed his hand. Eleanor stepped nearer. "And Sir Matthew never wears perfume because strong scents trigger his headaches. You smell of orange blossom." The same fragrance on Augusta's forged accounts. Julian crossed the space in 3 strides and seized the man's wrist. The silver-haired wig shifted, exposing dark hair beneath it. The false physician struck Julian across the face and ran. Samuel overturned a table into his path. Constables tackled him beside the musician's platform. Augusta reached the side door, but Clara blocked it with a serving cart. Mr. Harcourt removed the prisoner's wig. Several guests recognized him at once. "Mr. Vale," Eleanor said. The missing hospital clerk stared back at her. Augusta's lover had never gone to London. He had hidden in plain sight, behind the authority of the king's physician. "Where is Sir Matthew Wren?" Mr. Harcourt demanded. Vale laughed. "Probably dead by now." Augusta stopped struggling. Her fear was not for herself. It was for Vale. That told Eleanor, who held the greater power between them. "You used Augusta to obtain Julian's signatures," Eleanor said. "You copied my accounts, transferred the money to Albion, and turned St. Anne's into a testing ground. But you did not design this alone." Vale's smile faded. "Who gave the order to poison the king?" Before he could answer, a shot cracked from the gallery. The bullet struck Vale in the shoulder. Guests screamed and scattered. The shooter disappeared behind a curtain, leaving an open window above the courtyard. Vale collapsed, alive but bleeding heavily. Eleanor tore open his coat. As she pressed cloth against the wound, A key fell from his inner pocket. Its tag read, Blackmere Lodge, cellar. Vale grabbed her wrist. "The real physician is there," he gasped. "But Augusta did not steal your cylinder." Eleanor looked toward Julian's sister. Augusta stood between two constables, empty-handed. "Then who did?" Vale's eyes moved past Eleanor to the royal officials gathered around Lord Pembroke. "The man who just left to warn the king." Eleanor turned. Mr. Harcourt was gone. So was the evidence box containing the list of poisoned hospitals. Eleanor left Samuel to keep Vale alive and ordered the remaining constables to guard Augusta. Julian secured 2 horses, while Clara carried word to the palace that Mr. Harcourt was not to be trusted. They rode toward Blackmere Lodge beneath a moonless sky. "Why would Harcourt risk exposing himself?" Julian asked. "Because Vale named the lodge. If Sir Matthew is alive, he can identify everyone involved. And Augusta? She may have joined Vale willingly, but Harcourt used both of them." Julian's hands tightened on the reins. "I brought Harcourt into St. Anne's inquiry. You also gave Augusta control of my money, accepted forged evidence, and destroyed my credibility before the conspiracy needed a scapegoat. I know." "No, Julian, you have begun to know." He absorbed the words without defending himself. Blackmere Lodge stood dark among the trees. No servants answered the door. Eleanor unlocked it with Vale's key, and they entered through a kitchen filled with abandoned plates and half-burned candles. A sound came from beneath the floor. They found the cellar stairs behind a tapestry. At the bottom, 2 armed men guarded a locked room. Julian struck the first with his pistol before the man could fire. Eleanor threw a lantern at the second, not to injure him but to ignite the spilled brandy beside his boots. He stumbled back in panic, and Julian disarmed him. Inside the locked room, Sir Matthew Wren lay chained to a cot. He was weak, bruised, and severely dehydrated, but alive. "Duchess," he whispered. "Did my messenger reach you?" "He died at St. Anne's." Grief passed across the physician's face. "Nathaniel volunteered because Harcourt's men were watching every royal road." Eleanor cut the ropes around his wrists. "Why did you write that St. Anne's held the original ledger?" "Because Albion's first payment was made through your hospital. Mr. Vale kept 2 books, one falsified, one recording the real buyers. Nathaniel stole a page from the true ledger. Where is the rest?" Sir Matthew looked toward the ceiling. "Harcourt took it tonight." Julian knelt beside him. "Why is a magistrate controlling a medical company? He is not merely a magistrate. Harcourt manages several private trusts that will lose fortunes if the king signs the reform of charitable trusts. Albion allowed him to drain hospital funds while testing poison on patients no one powerful would investigate. "And my sister helped him," Julian said. "Lady Augusta provided access. Mr. Vale provided false accounts. You provided the name that made respectable men stop asking questions." Julian lowered his head. Sir Matthew turned to Eleanor. "Harcourt planned to make you the public face of the scandal. A duchess obsessed with medicine, stealing from patients and experimenting upon them. It was a story the newspapers would eagerly print. He nearly succeeded. He still may. He has the cylinder, the ledger, and your husband's signed authorizations." A carriage approached outside. Eleanor extinguished the lamp. Julian looked through a crack in the shutters. 4 men. Harcourt sent them to destroy the lodge, Sir Matthew said. "There are barrels of lamp oil in the storage room." Smoke curled beneath the cellar door. Eleanor searched the walls. The room had no windows, but cold air moved across her cheek from behind a cabinet. She pushed it aside and found a narrow coal chute. "You first," she told Sir Matthew. Julian lifted the physician, while Eleanor climbed ahead and cleared the iron grate with a broken poker. Flames spread across the cellar ceiling as the three crawled through the chute. They emerged behind the lodge moments before its windows exploded outward. One of Harcourt's men spotted them and raised his pistol. Julian stepped in front of Eleanor. The shot tore through his upper arm, spinning him to the ground. Eleanor seized Julian's fallen weapon and fired into the attacker's leg. The other men fled when constables summoned by Clara appeared along the road. Eleanor bound Julian's wound tightly. "You saved me," he said. "I preserved a witness." The distinction silenced him. Clara arrived on horseback, breathless and pale. "The palace received our warning," she said. "But Harcourt arrived first. He told the guards you had confessed and that Sir Matthew was an impostor." "Where is the king?" Eleanor asked. "In the royal dining chamber." A distant church bell struck midnight. Clara's voice broke. "The king drank his medicinal tea 10 minutes ago." Eleanor, Sir Matthew, and Julian reached the palace as the royal physicians carried the unconscious king from the dining chamber. Harcourt stood beside the bed, holding the stolen copper cylinder. "Arrest them," he ordered. "They abducted Sir Matthew and brought an impostor to compromise His Majesty." Sir Matthew stepped into the candlelight. Several guards recognized him, but Harcourt produced the silk message from the cylinder. "This document bears the physician's name and implicates St. Anne's. The Duchess forged it to conceal her experiments." Eleanor ignored him and examined the king. His breathing was slow, his skin cold, and a blue stain marked the rim of his teacup. "The same compound used on Lord Pembroke," she said. But the king swallowed more. Harcourt blocked her path. Julian, weakened by blood loss, drew himself upright. "My wife warned us." I overruled her, signed the transfers, and recommended Albion. "If she is denied access to the king, his death belongs to every man who chooses my former arrogance over her knowledge." The Lord Chamberlain ordered Harcourt aside. Eleanor and Sir Matthew worked together. They emptied the king's stomach, administered charcoal, and used a binding agent Sir Matthew had developed after studying the poisoned hospital patients. For several terrible minutes, the king did not respond. Then he coughed. His eyes opened. Harcourt backed toward the door. Clara entered with constables, and Augusta in chains. "Mr. Vale confessed," Clara announced. He identified Harcourt as Albion's owner. Harcourt seized a guard's pistol and fired. The shot struck the bedpost. Julian tackled him, but his wounded arm failed. Harcourt broke free and escaped through the servants' passage, taking the cylinder with him. Augusta watched her brother collapse. "I can tell you where he will go," she said. Eleanor looked at her coldly. "Why should anyone believe you?" "Because Harcourt will kill Vale, then me. He promised that once you were convicted, I would control St. Anne's. I believed the hospital would make me respected. Vale convinced me no one would die. The tonic would only create symptoms. You saw patients collapse and continued." Augusta lowered her eyes. "Yes." The admission offered no excuse. "Where is the real ledger?" Eleanor asked. "Inside St. Anne's original foundation stone. Vale hid it there because Harcourt never entered the public ward." A palace messenger rushed into the chamber before Eleanor could respond. "Fire has broken out at St. Anne's Hospital. The western doors have been chained from outside." Eleanor's blood turned cold. More than 30 patients remained inside. Augusta began to weep. "Harcourt knows the ledger is there." Through the palace windows, an orange glow rose above London. Julian struggled to stand. Eleanor stopped him. "You can barely remain conscious." "It was my authority that gave Harcourt the hospital," he said. "I will not hide behind you while it burns." Sir Matthew remained with the king. Eleanor, Julian, Clara, and the constables raced back toward St. Anne's. They arrived to find flames pouring from the upper windows and patients screaming behind the chained doors. Then the roof above the children's ward began to collapse. Eleanor ran toward the chained doors. "Axes!" she shouted. "Break the hinges, not the center." Firemen attacked the iron fittings, while Eleanor circled the building. The western staircase was already burning, but an old delivery tunnel connected the laundry yard to the basement. She had designed it during the fever epidemic so food could enter without crossing the isolation wards. "Clara, lead the firemen through the tunnel. I'm going to the children." Julian caught her arm. Blood had soaked through his bandage. "You cannot reach them alone, and you cannot climb with that wound. I can carry a child with one arm." She wanted to refuse him, but another section of roof collapsed. There was no time. They entered through the basement as smoke rolled along the ceiling. Clara guided patients toward the tunnel, while Eleanor and Julian climbed the servants' stairs. At the children's ward, a fallen beam blocked the doorway. Voices cried from inside. Julian braced his shoulder against the timber. His wounded arm trembled. "Pull them through as soon as I lift it." Together they raised the beam enough for Eleanor to crawl beneath. 5 children huddled beside Nurse Margaret. Thomas Bell was among them, holding his infant sister inside his coat. Eleanor passed the youngest children through first. Julian carried 2 down the stairs before exhaustion forced him against the wall. Thomas refused to leave until every child was safe. The ceiling cracked above them. Eleanor shoved Thomas toward Julian as burning plaster fell. Julian covered both with his body. Flames caught the back of his coat, but Clara extinguished them when they reached the basement. Outside, Eleanor counted every patient and worker. No one was missing. Only then did she look at Julian. His wounded arm hung uselessly, and burns reddened his shoulder. He had risked his life, but she would not allow courage in 1 hour to erase cruelty committed over months. "You need treatment. Find the ledger first." The hospital's original foundation stone stood beneath the dedication plaque Augusta had ordered removed. Fire had cracked the marble, exposing a narrow cavity. Inside lay a leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth. Eleanor opened it before the chief constable, Clara, and 2 physicians. Every payment was recorded. Money taken from hospital trusts, shipments of poisoned tonic, bribes to officials, and sums sent to Harcourt's private accounts. Julian's signatures appeared repeatedly. Beside each was a note in Vale's hand, authorized without review. The words wounded more deeply than any forged accusation. Julian had not designed the scheme, but his carelessness had funded it. "Make copies before anything else happens," Eleanor ordered. A constable turned toward the printing office across the street. A pistol shot stopped him. Harcourt emerged from behind the fire engine holding Augusta at gunpoint. He had escaped the palace and intercepted the carriage transporting her. In his other hand was the copper cylinder. "Give me the ledger," he demanded. Augusta's face was streaked with tears. "Do not do it, Eleanor." Harcourt pressed the weapon beneath her jaw. "Your sudden conscience is tiresome." Julian moved forward. Harcourt aimed at his chest. "Your title made you valuable, Ashbourne. Your vanity made you obedient. Do not become brave now." Eleanor closed the ledger. "If I give it to you, you will burn it and kill her anyway." "Perhaps, but refusing guarantees it." Eleanor noticed coal dust on Harcourt's boots. He had come through the same delivery tunnel and left the entrance unguarded. Behind him, Thomas Bell quietly emerged from the smoke. The boy held the broken hospital bell rope. Eleanor kept Harcourt's attention. "You needed Julian's signature because your own name could never survive scrutiny. That is why you framed me. I framed you because England eagerly distrusts a woman who possesses authority. Thomas looped the rope around Harcourt's ankle and pulled. Harcourt fell. The pistol fired into the air. Augusta rolled away as constables rushed forward, but Harcourt slashed the rope, seized a horse, and galloped into the darkness. He had lost Augusta and failed to recover the ledger. Yet when Eleanor opened the book again, several pages were missing from the final section. Augusta stared at the torn binding. He took the names of the officials who financed Albion. "Do you know where he is going?" Eleanor asked. Augusta nodded toward Westminster's distant towers. "Parliament meets at noon. Harcourt intends to accuse Julian before the House of Lords and offer those names in exchange for immunity." Julian looked at the signatures that could destroy him. "Then I will confess before he can bargain." By 11 the next morning, copies of the surviving ledger pages had been placed with the Crown, the police, and 3 independent newspapers. Eleanor refused to let the truth depend upon a single book again. Julian stood before a mirror at Ashbourne House, while Clara secured his injured arm beneath a formal black coat. The burns across his shoulder had worsened overnight, and fever had begun to brighten his eyes. "You should remain in bed," Eleanor said. "I remained comfortable while you carried every consequence of my choices. I will not do so today. You may collapse before you speak. Then I will confess quickly." There was no self-pity in his voice. For the first time, he seemed to understand that admitting he had been deceived was not enough. He had chosen pride over inquiry, his sister's flattery over his wife's expertise, and control over trust. Before leaving, he placed a legal document upon the table. "It restores your dowry in full," he said. "I have sold the northern estate to replace every pound I transferred. St. Anne's will be placed in an independent trust under your sole direction. I have also withdrawn the petition declaring you incompetent." Eleanor did not touch the papers. "Restitution is required, Julian. It is not forgiveness. I know. And you will say publicly that I warned you. Yes, that you had the opportunity to investigate and refused." His face tightened. "Yes." Only then did she take the documents. Westminster was surrounded by crowds. News of the poisoned king, the hospital fire, and St. Anne's forged accounts had spread across London. Former patients gathered near the entrance, holding handwritten signs bearing Eleanor's name. Others demanded Julian's imprisonment. Inside the House of Lords, Harcourt stood calmly before the assembled peers. He had exchanged his burned coat for formal robes and presented himself as a magistrate exposing corruption. The stolen cylinder rested on the clerk's table beside several torn ledger pages. "Duke Ashbourne authorized every payment," Harcourt announced. His wife administered the experimental medicine, and Lady Augusta managed distribution. "I discovered their crimes and attempted to preserve the evidence." Eleanor watched from the witness gallery with Sir Matthew, Clara, Samuel, and Augusta under guard. Harcourt had arranged the facts carefully. Every true detail had been separated from its context and turned into a lie. Julian was summoned first. He walked to the center of the chamber alone. "Did you authorize £20,000 from your wife's trust?" a lord asked. "I did." "Did you recommend Albion Medical Supply Company to the royal household?" "I did." "Did you sign the petition alleging that Duchess Eleanor was mentally incapable of managing hospital funds?" Julian looked toward Eleanor. "I did. The allegations against her were false." Murmurs rose across the chamber. "Were you forced to sign?" "No." "Did Mr. Harcourt forge your name?" "No." "Then why should this house believe you were not directing the scheme?" "Because I was not clever enough to direct it," Julian said. "I was vain enough to enable it." The chamber fell silent. He described Augusta's accusations, Eleanor's warnings, and his refusal to review the hospital accounts. He admitted publicly dismissing his wife as a thief before patients and staff. He named the moment she had challenged Mr. Vale's appointment and the moment he had chosen his sister's praise instead. "I believed authority made me correct," he said. "Mr. Harcourt needed no weapon against my wife. I supplied him with my pride." Harcourt smiled. "A moving attempt to protect your Duchess. But remorse does not erase signatures." "No," Julian replied. "That is why I have surrendered control of St. Anne's, restored her stolen funds from my property, and asked the Crown to investigate me without privilege." His testimony did not free him. It made the cost real. Eleanor was called next. Harcourt approached her with the copper cylinder. "You recovered this object from a dead messenger?" "Yes." "And the document inside named St. Anne's as the source of poisoned medicine?" "It named St. Anne's as the location of the original ledger, a ledger bearing your husband's signature, and your private account numbers." Laughter broke from several benches. Harcourt's smile vanished. Eleanor presented the full chain, the forged invoices carrying Augusta's orange blossom perfume, the cellar key held by Vale, the Albion bottles, the poisoned patients, Sir Matthew's captivity, and the hospital ledger. Samuel confirmed the medical findings. Clara testified that Augusta's nurse had planted cyanide in Eleanor's bag. Sir Matthew identified the dead messenger and authenticated the silk document. Augusta was brought forward last. She admitted giving Vale access to Eleanor's office, copying her signatures, and persuading Julian that his wife was unstable. She had believed Vale loved her. By the time she understood patients were being deliberately poisoned, Harcourt had threatened to expose her and destroy the Ashbourne name. "You still continued," Eleanor said. Augusta bowed her head. "Yes." Her confession implicated herself, but she named Harcourt as the architect of Albion. Harcourt raised the torn pages, and yet these records identify 5 respected members of this house as Albion's financial partners. If I am a criminal, then so are the men preparing to judge me. Panic moved through the chamber. The named lords demanded an immediate adjournment. Harcourt offered to surrender the pages in exchange for immunity and passage out of England. His gamble was clear. Powerful men would protect themselves by burying the entire case. Eleanor looked at the ledger's torn binding. The missing pages were written on both sides, yet Harcourt displayed only 5 sheets. The final page, containing Albion's complete ownership declaration, was absent. Then she remembered the copper cylinder. When she had opened it, the silk message had filled only half its depth. Harcourt removed a second document from the cylinder, she said. He froze. The messenger carried more than Sir Matthew's warning. He carried the legal registration of Albion. Harcourt seized the cylinder from the clerk and twisted its lower band. A hidden compartment opened. He pulled out a second roll of silk and rushed toward the nearest fireplace. Julian intercepted him. Harcourt struck his wounded shoulder, driving him to his knees, but Eleanor caught the falling document before it reached the flames. The royal seal appeared at the top. Beneath it was Albion's full list of owners, verified by Treasury investigators. Harcourt's name stood first. Below his were the 5 lords who had demanded adjournment. The chamber erupted. Guards surrounded the accused men. Harcourt drew a small vial from beneath his robes and held it above his mouth. "You will never question me," he said. Eleanor recognized the blue liquid. "Do not swallow it. That dose will not kill you quickly." Harcourt hesitated. "You tested it on the poor because you feared pain," she continued. "You know exactly how long you will remain conscious." His courage failed. A guard knocked the vial away and forced him to the floor. Before the chamber could formally arrest him, the doors opened. The Lord Chamberlain entered carrying a command from the king. His expression was grave. Duchess Eleanor has been cleared of the accusations against her. Mr. Harcourt and his partners will face charges of treason, murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Then he turned toward Julian. But His Majesty also commands that the Duke of Ashbourne answer for the unlawful seizure of his wife's trust and the deaths enabled by his authorization. Julian bowed his head. Eleanor watched the guards approach her husband. This time, he did not ask her to save him. Julian was not taken to an ordinary cell. As a duke, he was placed under guarded confinement while the Crown investigated his conduct. The privilege offended Eleanor, but she understood that public accountability would matter more than a night behind iron bars. The trials began 6 weeks later. By then, the king had recovered enough to sign the reform of charitable trusts. Albion Medical Supply Company had been closed, its warehouses seized, and every surviving bottle destroyed under the supervision of independent physicians. Eleanor testified for 3 days. She explained how the conspiracy had begun with St. Anne's financial difficulties. Harcourt had created Albion as a false supplier, then used private hospital trusts to purchase worthless or poisoned medicine. Mr. Vale entered St. Anne's as a clerk, copied Eleanor's signature, removed the true ledger, and prepared false invoices suggesting that she had stolen charitable funds. Augusta provided access. Driven by resentment toward a sister-in-law whose work commanded genuine respect, she had encouraged Julian to believe Eleanor was reckless, disobedient, and mentally unfit. She wanted control of St. Anne's and the social authority attached to its founder. Harcourt had understood the weakness inside the Ashbourne marriage. Eleanor's independence wounded Julian's pride. Augusta's flattery strengthened it. Every time Eleanor questioned an appointment or demanded to inspect a payment, Julian interpreted her expertise as defiance. He had been given repeated opportunities to choose differently. When Eleanor warned him that Vale lacked experience, Julian dismissed her concern. When Augusta accused Eleanor of instability, he never asked for a physician's examination. When the petition against his wife was placed before him, he signed it without allowing her to answer. When £20,000 were taken from her protected trust, he approved the transfer because controlling St. Anne's mattered more to him than understanding why its founder objected. Harcourt had not forged the Duke's failures. He had merely arranged them. Once Albion gained access to the hospital, Harcourt tested diluted poison on charity patients. The formula created recurring illness, allowing the company to sell more medicine while measuring how much poison a body could endure. The poor served as unwilling subjects because Harcourt believed their deaths would attract little attention. Sir Matthew Wren discovered the pattern and began investigating. Harcourt imprisoned him at Blackmere Lodge, while Vale impersonated him at the physician's banquet. Sir Matthew's messenger, Nathaniel Price, stole 1 page from Albion's true ledger and carried the physician's warning inside a ciphered cylinder. Harcourt's men shot Nathaniel and forced poison down his throat. They placed him inside a royal carriage and sent him to St. Anne's, where Eleanor had already been publicly accused of theft. The cyanide planted in her medical bag would transform a financial scandal into a murder charge. Yet Nathaniel had anticipated betrayal. Before beginning his journey, he allowed Sir Matthew to conceal the copper cylinder inside a prepared layer beneath his coat. The bullet drove it through the fabric and into his wound, leaving Eleanor to discover it during surgery. The plan failed because Eleanor noticed what the conspirators overlooked: the clean boots, the delayed convulsions, the broken lock on her case. the orange blossom scent upon the forged accounts, and the false physician's uninjured hand. Harcourt's final attempt to destroy St. Anne's failed for the same reason. He knew the hospital's finances, but not its structure. He did not know Eleanor had designed the delivery tunnel that saved the patients. He did not know Thomas Bell would risk himself for the woman who had once saved his sister. And he did not know Eleanor had instructed the printer to make copies of every recovered ledger page before bringing the original to Parliament. The verdicts were delivered publicly. Harcourt was convicted of treason, murder, attempted regicide, fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy. His estates were seized to compensate the affected hospitals and the families of the dead. He would spend the remainder of his life in prison. The 5 lords who had financed Albion lost their seats, property, and royal appointments. 2 received lengthy prison sentences. 3 were transported after admitting they had approved the use of charity patients as subjects. Vale survived his gunshot wound. His testimony confirmed the payment chain, but it did not free him. He was convicted of fraud, poisoning, false imprisonment, and complicity in Nathaniel Price's murder. Augusta pleaded guilty. Her cooperation spared her the harshest sentence, but not punishment. Her inheritance was confiscated for the victims' fund, and she was sentenced to 12 years' imprisonment. At the hearing, she turned toward Eleanor. "I wanted what you had." Eleanor looked at her across the courtroom. "You wanted the respect. You did not want to perform the work that earned it." Augusta lowered her eyes. Julian's judgment came last. The Crown found no evidence that he knew Albion's medicine contained poison, but ignorance did not absolve him of unlawfully taking his wife's money, submitting a false incompetency petition, and placing the hospital under corrupt management after refusing repeated warnings. He was ordered to restore Eleanor's trust at his personal expense, relinquish every charitable and medical appointment, and fund permanent compensation for the families harmed by Albion. He was formally censured before the House of Lords and suspended from parliamentary duties for 5 years. The king offered no pardon. Julian accepted every condition. At his own request, he addressed the hospital staff, patients, and donors in the courtyard of the partially rebuilt St. Anne's. He stood beneath the damaged wall where Eleanor's dedication plaque had once hung. "My wife did not deceive me," he said. "I deceived myself. I called her judgment disobedience because I resented needing it. I declared her unstable without evidence, took money protected by her marriage settlement, and handed her life's work to people she had warned me not to trust." No one applauded. He continued anyway. When the consequences arrived, they fell first upon patients, nurses, and families who had no part in my pride. Duchess Eleanor owes me neither forgiveness nor silence. St. Anne's exists because of her. It nearly died because of me. He then presented the new trust documents to the hospital's independent governors. Eleanor alone would appoint the medical board. No member of the Ashbourne family, including Julian, could interfere with its finances. Only after her reputation, property, authority, and financial security had been legally restored did Eleanor make her decision about their marriage. She requested a formal separation. Julian did not challenge it. He transferred the dower house and its surrounding land into her permanent control, though Eleanor chose to reside in rooms beside the hospital during reconstruction. Julian moved to the smallest Ashbourne estate and began personally administering the compensation fund under Crown supervision. 3 months later, he came to St. Anne's without servants or ceremony. Eleanor found him in the unfinished courtyard, where masons were fastening a new silver plaque to the wall. The inscription did not name a duke or family. It read, St. Anne's Hospital, founded by Duchess Eleanor Ashbourne, for all who require care. Julian held out the old brass hospital keys. Fire had blackened their edges. "They belong to you," he said. "They always did." Yes. He placed them in her palm, but did not close her fingers around them. He had finally learned that even the smallest act of control was no longer his right. "I will not ask when you might return," he said. "I will only ask whether there is any work of repair you wish me to continue." "Pay every family," Eleanor replied. "Testify whenever the surviving hospitals need you, and never describe yourself as Harcourt's victim." Julian's face tightened with the pain of recognition. "I will not." Eleanor did not promise reconciliation. Remorse had changed him, but it had not erased the woman publicly humiliated, the patients poisoned, or the trust he had deliberately broken. Whether he became worthy of forgiveness was his responsibility. Whether she ever offered it remained hers. He bowed and left the courtyard alone. Behind Eleanor, the restored hospital doors opened. Clara carried fresh linen into the Western ward. Samuel welcomed a new group of medical students. Thomas Bell rang the repaired bell while his little sister laughed beside him. A young nurse approached with the admission ledger. "Your Grace, the board is waiting for your authorization." Eleanor looked once at the scorched brass keys in her hand. On the morning Julian had removed them, the entire ward had heard him call her charity a mask for theft. Now the same ward waited for her decision. She fitted the largest key into the lock, opened the doors herself, and said, "Admit the patients."